Hello, this is Julia Widdop with Talk Story TV, and today we have with us Anthony Burcher, and he is the current 2012 champion liar of the Southeast, and he's a professional storyteller from Eastern Virginia, and I will turn this over to him now. Welcome, Anthony.
Well, first of all, Julia, thank you very much for having me. I do appreciate it. And I think we said we would go ahead and start with a story.
Great.
If that's all right. Now, story. When you are a little kid, one of your first jobs, one of your first responsibilities on this planet is to figure out which one of your two parents, which one of the adults living in your house is the one that you do not want to make angry. In my house, it was our dad. You didn't want to make our dad mad. Now, with Mom, it just seemed like she was always mad. But we knew not to make Dad angry. Now, when my dad would get mad, he would say the same thing every single time. It was long, it was awkward, but he'd always say it. He'd say, "Son, I'm going to hit you upside your head one time and make you think lightning struck with the sun shining." He'd say that whenever he got mad. However, because he was angry, he would get faster as he said it. He'd say, "Son, I'm going to hit you upside your head one time, make you think lightning struck the sun shining." I say, "Dad, what was that last part?"
Not a good...
No, I was that little kid. That was the little kid who frequently got ear infections. I always got these bad ear infections. And one time, my mom took me to the doctor. It was in my left ear, and it was awful. Just this terrible ear infection. Doctor looked in there, big old abscess in there. He says, "Oh, Mrs. Burcher, this is one of the worst we've ever seen. Here's what we want to do. There's a chance it might pop on its own. So we're going to send you home, and hopefully overnight it's going to pop on its own. But if it doesn't, you bring him back tomorrow, and we might have to lance it right here in the office. And it's pretty bad in there, so there's a chance we might even have to put him under." So this was pretty serious. My folks took me home. And one of the nicest things about being sick in our parents' house was that you got to sleep in our parents' bed. Oh, this was wonderful. Gigantic bed, big old thick mattress, and these feather pillows, these huge feather pillows. Now, my dad was an auto mechanic his entire life. And usually his pillow always had the same two smells. There was that oil and grease smell that all mechanics have, and then there was a second smell. All mechanics believe the same myth, that oil and grease smell can be covered up with Old Spice. So there was those two competing smells in that pillow. I loved to lay there and just roll in that pillow. It was so wonderful. I enjoyed those smells. Now I was hurting pretty bad, so out in the hall, though, I could hear my dad talking to my brother and my little sister, Wendy. He was saying, "Y'all leave him alone. Y'all leave him alone. I come upside your head one time, make you think lightning struck, sun shining. You leave him alone." And then you hear, "Yes, Dad, yes, Dad." And I was laying in my parents' bed. I was kind of bored. And this story, believe it or not, is actually about my sister, Wendy. Now, she was born about 3 or 4 years after me and my brother Matt. So naturally, we teased her without mercy. It wasn't fair, but we did, I confess. We teased her without mercy. And one of the things I would do to mess with her is I would rewrite the words to songs and sing them to her. No kid's ever done that before, but that's what I would do. Now, there was a song, old country song back then, called Delta Dawn. My sister's name was Wendy Dawn. So naturally, now the old song, I'm a horrible singer, and I apologize. The old song was kind of like, "Delta Dawn, what's that dress you have on?" Something like that. I changed all the words. When I sang it, it was, "Wendy Dawn, what's those stinky clothes you have on? Could it be from not taking a bath? And did I hear you say people were fainting and falling away, going to that laundry in the sky?" Oh, she hated the Wendy Dawn song, but I love to sing the Wendy Dawn song. And I'm laying there in that bed, and my ear's just hurting away, and I look up, and there in the doorway is my sister, Wendy. And she's got one of my dad's hammers. I don't know where she got this hammer, but she had one of my dad's hammers. Now, me, I'm not showing off my cleverness now at all, but I start singing the Wendy Dawn song. Wendy Dawn, what's those stinky clothes you have? It's the first time she ever smiled while I sang that song. Could it be from not taking a bath? She now had the hammer above her head, doing like this over her head. She looked like Thor from the comic books, swinging that hammer around. And about the time I hit laundry in the sky, she let loose. That hammer flew. It was a direct hit on this ear. And I screamed like I've never screamed before. And this little yellow glob just shot out across the pillow. It was terrible pain. My folks ran in there, and they scooped me up, took me to the doctor, and the doctor couldn't believe it. He was like, wow, we didn't think this thing was going to pop. They were actually thanking my sister for doing this to me. And not only that, not only did she escape my dad's lightning, it was also the last time I ever sang her the Wendy Dawn song. There's our story, our opening story.
Oh, that's a great one. Okay, well, and you wrote a book, you and your wife wrote a book, 101 Games to Teach Storytelling Skills. And
we sure did.
I am excited about this. Oh, you've written 2 of them.
We've actually written 2 books. And so I will happily tell you all about them if you wish.
I would. I'd love to hear about them.
Okay. The 26 years. We have done that for a long time. And so in the cabin, when it's raining, thunder, lightning, they'd have some games to play with kids that needed no props, no balls, no frisbees, no fun noodles. So we wrote this book, and making fun out of nothing at all. And it's 101 games, use no props whatsoever. And we're Presbyterians, so we took this book and we approached the Presbyterian publishing house. They said, no, we don't want to do that. Sometimes Presbyterians are they're often called the frozen chosen. So the Presbyterians turned us down, our own church. But we took it to the Methodist publishing house, and they said, wow, this is great. We want to publish it. So we said, awesome. They put out a copy of it, and it sold out as press 1. But they said, okay, that was great, but we don't want to do a second printing of it. We said, a second edition of this book, which was wonderful. We said, okay. And then it did pretty well, and they said, what else have you got? And I said, well, I'm a storyteller, and I've slowly been collecting these games that I think teach storytelling. Would you be interested in that? And they said, yeah. And so after some hard work, my wife and I published 101 games that teach storytelling skills. And it has been out for less than a month. But we just heard last night the International Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro just ordered 40 copies for the festival, which is coming up in about 2 weeks. So it's out and it's doing pretty well.
Oh, that's exciting. That is exciting. I'm planning to teach myself how to be a storyteller with those.
Well, there you go. This is the book to have. And so I will say, or I'll offer one of the reasons you want to pick up this book, any storyteller should pick up this book, is because early on in the book, it has something I think every storyteller needs to know, the skills you need to be a storyteller. Very early in the book, I list the 10 skills you need to have in front of an audience. And then I list the 10 skills you need before you get on stage. And this has kind of been a personal crusade of mine. If you don't mind, I'll preach on it.
Oh, I love
That's
that.
Okay. So in the world of storytelling, people say this is the way we learn storytelling. You tell a story and get coaching. Tell a story and get coaching. That's how we do it. Tell a story and get coaching. And there was something in that process missing. I always thought there was something missing in that process. Not that storytelling and getting coaching is not a wonderful thing. It is wonderful. But a long time ago when I was 10 years old, I tried out for the school band, and I was going to be a drummer. And when you're 10 years old, they give you this little drum book, some drumsticks. They don't let you play an entire song and then get coaching on it. You have to learn what was called your rudiments. Up into the trombone or saxophone, whatever, you play your scales. And then whatever art form you're in, you always have rudiments you have to learn first. For example, you wouldn't, if you're a ballerina, you don't get to do Swan Lake and then ask for critiques at the end of it. You slowly learn how to do Swan Lake. And so I said, we're not being serious as an art form unless we list our skills. What are the skills you need to learn first to be a storyteller? And I think that's one of the reasons this book has value, is it lists the skills you need, and then there's 101 games in here to tell you, or that will teach you those skills, or hopefully teach you those skills. And so if it's okay, and you're always welcome to say, Anthony, you're just long-winded and you need to stop. That's fine. Won't be offended.
Not at all. I'm happy to hear a storyteller.
A storyteller needs, okay? And number one, and you're welcome to critique me if you want to, because I just told you a story, putting my own self on the line. Number one, a storyteller has to have good facial expressions. And I hope you saw in my story, as it says in the book, does the storyteller's face enhance the emotions of the story? And I try to have an animated face when I tell stories. And this is quite an interesting challenge in this little square, telling stories. And so number one, facial expressions. You're in front of the audience and your face is doing a lot of the talking, not just your mouth. All right, that's skill number one. Skill number two, gestures. And this is really hard on this little screen, but my arms are always moving when I'm telling a story. And hopefully that it comes through the audience. And we all know what gestures are. I don't have to explain them. Third, and this was tough today, eye contact. This is how we differ from the theater major and the actor. We're not bound by that fourth wall. And I did a storytelling concert this past Saturday night, and I tried to look at every single audience member in the eyes at least once. Connect them to me and connect them to the story. And for eye contact for some people is difficult, and so it's one of the skills you need to know. Now, to be fair about that, there's some storytelling venues I've done where you're on stage, the lights are in your eyes, there's no looking at the audience in their eyes. Right. That's not going to happen. So it's venue permitting. Now, the next skill I think storytellers need is reading the audience. What is your audience telling you? Now, so as I was telling, and I hope you don't get a little self-conscious, but I was watching your face while you were listening to the story. Is she smiling? Is she enjoying it? Is she getting the story? Because sometimes as a storyteller, we have a wonderful thing that actors don't have. We can back up the story and retell it if the audience isn't understanding. In theater, you're stuck with that script, and you have to keep going. If you're doing poetry, you don't get to stop. You have to keep reciting that poem, and on and on. But we get to retell it. If the audience doesn't understand it, we retell it. So next skill, reading the audience. And, all right, then, next skill, descriptive ability. And the story I just told, I hope you saw not just my parents' bed, but maybe your parents' bed. You saw the big fluffy pillows. Or heard the song. But descriptive ability, did I give you enough of a visual painting? And that descriptive ability has to be a running thing. It's not something you write down. Now, tempo. I'm a storyteller that does go quickly. I don't mind going.
We have a little lag in the...
Sometimes I have to slow down. I'm blessed that I get to do a lot of retirement communities, and there my tempo has to come down, slow it down a little bit, and that's fine. And that's some of the best folks to tell for, though. Now, the next we're working these skills. The next skill I think folks should know is voice inflection. We've all heard the storyteller that talks like this, and they have one tone through the entire story. And so now, in my story, when I was happy, I was happy. When I was in pain, I was in pain. And voice inflection, as I say in the book, do all the vocal ranges support the story and its characters and their emotions? And now, next on our list, this is number 8. And these are not in order of importance. Folks might disagree. But number 8, skills you need from an audience, is diction. And I hope you've heard today that I speak clearly. A storyteller has to speak clearly. You can speak quickly, but you have to speak clearly. And I hope I do that. And next one, didn't know what to do with this microphone here. Skill number 9 I wrote down is projection. Folks need to hear you. That's just as basic and simple as storytelling rule as there is. Folks have to hear you, projection. And the last skill that I think you need in front of an audience is enthusiasm. Is the storyteller the person there most excited for the story? And when I told you that story earlier, I was excited to tell you that story. I was happy to do that. So enthusiasm, I think, is an extremely valuable skill. You have to have it. And so those are the 10 skills you need in front of an audience. Did you have any thoughts on those, or do they sound pretty good?
No, they all sound. I didn't think of some of those. I didn't realize you could go back and tell. If you saw that they weren't understanding, you could go back and tell your story over.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah, that's great.
That's a blessing, really.
Yeah.
And so, but you got to be paying attention to your audience. Mm-hmm. Are they getting it? And so now, that's all the skills you need in front of an audience. Second list is the skills you need before getting on stage.
Okay.
These are your preparation skills. And the number 1 skill on my list, and by the way, other storytellers are more than welcome to make up their own list of skills you need. I won't argue with you. But these are the skills I think are important. Skill number 1 on my list, before you go on stage, have you practiced, have you exercised your imagination? Where all these stories live. Everybody on this planet has an imagination, but for storytellers, that thing is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Exercising your imagination. And there's several stories and games in the book that do that challenge your imagination. Now, the next skill I put down is called discovering personal stories. What I told you there, most storytellers would qualify as a personal story from my own life. I think, and I sure could be wrong, but I think there's 3 types of storytellers. There's a type of storyteller that tells personal stories, what I just did. Then there's a second type of storyteller that tells the folk tales, the fairy tales, the tall tales, the fables. Nothing wrong with those. There's that type of storyteller. Then there's the third type of storyteller that tells both. And the personal stories and the fables. With me, I'm probably 90% personal stories, but 10% fables and folk tales, because I think those are extremely important. And so when we finish today, I'll tell you one of the other type. I'll tell you a folk tale or a fictional story, or some folks think it is. So number 3, there's discovering your own stories, and then there's discovering what stories are out there in the world you want to tell. And that's just research. It's really hard to come up with games for research. But we've all heard stories as kids that we would like to tell again, or to tell better, or in different ways. So, as a storyteller, discovering your own stories, and then discovering other stories in the world you would like to tell. And now, next thing you got to decide, this is number 4 in our list. Before you get on stage, sensory addition. And that means before you ever tell that story, you say to yourself, where can I insert the 5 senses in this story? Because that helps the audience relate. And in that story I told, I mentioned the smells of the oil and the grease and the Old Spice, which my dad's pillow always smelled like. And for a lot of folks, that brings it home. If you ever live with a mechanic, that you know what I'm talking about. And sadly, it was gross, but the yellow glob that shot out across the pillow, that was a sense with your eyes you probably didn't want to see. And so then I sang that horrible song. And so work those senses in. look at your story and say, where can I improve this story by adding in the 5 senses? Now, and for example, I do tell a story about one time my grandfather tricked me into drinking some moonshine. And I have a big, long monologue about how that tasted. And it was certainly awful, but it's fun to tell. Now, next skill I have listed in the book is word selection. We storytellers should never try to be a thesaurus. We should never try to use the biggest word. We should always try to use the best word. And picking the exact words for your story is important. And sometimes you have to tailor that to your audience. But word selection before you ever go on that stage, extremely important. Now, this next one, it has in the book, Powers of Observation. Storytellers, and I like what I said here in the book, so I will read it if it's okay. An effective storyteller is a people watcher. Storytellers need to be experts on how people sound, act, react, move, smell, and think. We, as storytellers, cannot report the world if we don't see the world and know the world. Storytellers are people watchers because there's a million characters in all of our stories, and we need to know how those people act. So there's games in the book teaching you, playing with games, all powers of observation, helping you recognize things you might not normally recognize. Now, next skill I have on there is creativity. And folks would go, wait a minute, that's imagination. No. Creativity and imagination are 2 different things. Everybody in this world has an imagination, and we use it all the time. But it's the artist that takes what's in their imagination and creates something with it and moves it into creativity. And so exercising creativity out of your imagination, that's a skill you got to do before you get on stage. And so I like folks to remember, imagination, creativity, 2 different things. Now, this next one, and it's hard to find games on this one, this next skill you have to have before you get on stage is a dedication to practice. And that's the most annoying one. You have to practice, and you have to rehearse. And there's few games that teach that, but I frequently will lock myself in a room and start telling stories, sometimes in front of a mirror, which helps in situations like this, but you've got to practice. You can't just wait till you get in front of the audience, and you got to be dedicated to it. And so, dedication to practice, I think it's a skill. If you're dedicated, that's a skill. Now, there's 2 more skills you need before you get on that stage. The first is what I call an above-average understanding of the language you speak. And if we're going to use the English language, we need to speak English well. Now, you can say you speak it good if one of your characters talks like that, but we should know the language. If a character is speaking poorly, we should understand why and know what affects people's ears. And sometimes folks will hear something spoken poorly, and they just react to it, and they're out of the story when they hear bad grammar. And so sometimes, if you're doing a regional story, there's a certain dialect you might use, but we need to understand the language we're using. And so lots of games in there about understanding the English language and the fun that you can have with it. Now, the last skill I have in the book, before you get on stage, you need an above-average understanding of story. What constitutes a story? And I think, and I'm not the only storyteller who thinks this, there's 3 things that constitute a story. The most important is place. Every story takes place somewhere. Every story has a setting. And so English teachers love that word setting. What's the setting of the novel or the play or whatever? It's a place. The most important thing in any story is the place. And for place, you don't have to give big, long, exaggerated descriptions. I mentioned
parents' bed.
If you picture your doctor's office, that doesn't change the story one bit. It's okay with me if you picture your parents' bed at home. That doesn't change the story, but every story has that place. Number 1 is place. Number 2, people, or characters that act like people. Sometimes we have animals that act like people in stories, and that's fine, that's wonderful. But it's going to have place, you're going to have people. and characters. And then the last thing in this story, an English teacher calls it conflict. I call it problem, just to keep the 3 Ps going. A problem or a conflict has to happen. And in that story I told today, I definitely had a conflict with my little sister, Wendy. And so one of the big reasons I think people should pick up this book is just to get those 20 skills, or to watch this program we're doing. But get the 20 skills, learn the 20 skills, and as I say somewhere in this book gives you 100, you have to practice, but this book gives you 101 ways to make that practice fun.
And where can people get the book?
I will say, my wife and I, we are big on using games to teach things. We love using games to teach things. And there's very few things you can't teach using a game. There are some good examples of things, for example, you shouldn't teach with a game. For example, you would never say, all right, Timmy, we're going to play a game why Uncle Joe had to die. No, that's a bad example of using a game to teach something. But there's wonderful examples of using games in recreation to teach what you need to know. So I have just talked a whole bunch. What would you like to know now?
Well, I'd like to know where people could get your book.
Ooh, thank you. The first place is always Amazon.com. And some folks, now I see a lot of books behind your head. A lot of Amazon folks get that free shipping. You get on the deluxe list, whatever it is. And so you go to Amazon and get it. Our publisher is Healthy Learning. So you go to healthylearning.com or Amazon.com. Or you can also go to AnthonyBurcher.com.
Okay.
And in all those places, you'll find our book. And so, but Amazon gives us free shipping. You might want to consider that.
Okay. And you promised us another story.
I can do that. I'd happily do that. And I want to tell a good, old-fashioned Sunday school story. Now, a long time ago, God's people got an idea. They wanted to go and visit God. Now, this is back before jet planes, electricity, rocket ships, airplanes, for any of that. The only way to get from Earth all the way up to heaven to where God lives was to build. They started making bricks and baking bricks, and this tower got higher and higher. They weren't going to give up. Now, it was hard work. You'd show up in the morning, something you hadn't counted on. You'd show up in the morning, they would hand you a bag of bricks. Next thing you knew, you were toting bricks upstairs. And now, by lunchtime, you're only halfway up the stairs. By supper, you finally get to dump out that bag of bricks, go back down, next day, get up, start it all over again. It was hard work, but these folks were determined. Now, the good Lord, He looked down from heaven, and He saw what they were doing. And I think the good Lord didn't want company. So now one of the things He could have done was just told the angels to all be nice and quiet, shut off the lights in heaven, and just pretend nobody was home. But the Lord's plans are always so much better. As those folks were on top of that tower, putting those bricks into place, all of a sudden, the wind started to blow. And then, without any warning, he was weighing. They were all balking tackwards and feeking spunny and whipping their fleur. And they hatched their screds, and they chubbed their wrens. Still nobody knew that anybody was weighing. All their tangs was tumbled. So they mocked Gad. They mocked Gad, and they dime clown from that tig old bower. They dime clown, and they got on the ground. And they hatched their screds mum sore, and chubbed their wrens mum sore. Still nobody knew that anybody was weighing. So they mocked Gad, and they walked away. They walked away leaking different spanguages. Now, friends, there's a stroll to the Maury. You don't need to nild a tig bower to reach God, because the good Lord, the waker of the world, is already hidden in your larch. That's our second story.
I love it.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Huh?
and I hope you understood it.
I did. That was great.
Excellent. So I was talking earlier about how you need to have fun with the English language, and you may already know those are called spoonerisms. When you whip your flirts, change those syllables around, and so
we're having some...
And that would be a terrible, terrible story to not practice first before you do it in front of an audience. And so that goes back to that dedication of practice. And so, but I want to thank you for hearing those two stories today. I do appreciate anybody who will listen. I love listeners.
I love stories. That's why I named this show Talk Story TV.
Good enough.
And also because that's what they call having a discussion in Hawaii, talking story.
Oh, I didn't know that. Are you from Hawaii?
I lived there for 6 years, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. I've been in Virginia pretty much my entire life. I don't get around too much.
Well, I very much appreciate your being on the show. Thank you. And thank you for the stories. And
Julia, it is totally my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you when we do the broadcast, and you'll be featured on our archives on YouTube.
Terrific. Julia, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.